"This animal isn't in the fossil record at all," I murmured, my eyes staring directly into the slab of rock before me. "I thought you guys said this was an animal that shouldn't be in this strata." "Yes," Chris replied. "We found this and many others like it jutting out of the rock, almost as if an earthquake or something tossed it out. I mean, look at it. It looks so primordial and ancient." "So you're saying you never actually got anyone to verify what this was?" I sighed, rolling my eyes. "We assumed you would know what it was," a lab assistant explained. "You're the expert." The assistant pointed at the scientists that had gathered around me. "We're here to research the village, not ponder on the past." The fossil before me was indeed bizarre. Perhaps the most bizarre thing I'd ever seen. It was large, roughly 3/4 the size of an average human. Not that I know the size of an average human. I am vertically challenged. But that isn't the point here. The creature appeared to have bony appendages that seemed almost tentacle-like, each ending with a hooked claw that I was sure was used to latch onto its prey, all the while slashing and tearing guts open, and then devouring it with a Venus flytrap-like mouth. Except tentacles don't have bones. They're mostly made of muscle, and no predatory creature ever had the mouth of a Venus flytrap lined with rows and rows of teeth. I mean, there were enough joints on their tentacles so that it could move fluidly. But even so, what the heck was this thing? "So," someone began. I looked up to see another lab scientist, who clearly had no idea what to make of the whole situation, any less than I did. "Anything?" "No," I confessed. Everyone sighed in uniform. "This fossil is a completely new species, completely unknown to science." "Oh well," Dr. Kreese sighed. "I guess we can send you back. You can keep the money." "Wait!" I interrupted. "I'm not done here yet. I want to know more." "About the fossil?" Kreese inquired. "No, the village. Remember the worms? Those are primitive. I just know it. And if they're primitive, there's a way to kill them." "And if there's a way to kill them?" "There might be a way to kill these things?" "Yes. I need to know how to kill them first, besides stepping on them or whatever," I decided. "Bring me the worm!" I paused. "Please." Very soon, I was brought another worm. Apparently, the original worm they'd shown had died whilst they were attempting to remove it from its original box to a terrarium. The worm they gave me was now in a box much like the first one, kept inside a box to hopefully sustain it. Which gave me an idea. A very silly idea, but one that might just work. "Dr. Kreese!" I called. She appeared, asking if I'd made any new discoveries. "No, but I want to know. How did you guys capture these worms?" "We send a drone," she explained. "It drops a rat on the ground, and then the worms come out crawling to get it, if we're lucky. Usually the ground just drags the rats in." "And," I smiled, thinking, "are these worms kept in the box they were originally collected in?" "Yeah," she replied. "Boxes are airtight, so there aren't any contaminants and all. Only downside is that the worms die off quickly, usually when we try transferring them." "Why?" "Then it could be the atmosphere that's killing them," I explained. "You send in a drone to collect the sample. The air isn't breathable in there, right?" "Yes, but if it's the atmosphere, why hasn't it filtered out to, well, everything else?" she posited. "I don't know," I murmured. "But something is keeping the village." And that's when I heard an ear-piercing siren that rang all throughout the camp. I watched Dr. Kreese and the lab members look outside at the containment wall, fear in their eyes. And that's when I heard the words that sent shivers down my spine. "Containment breach!" The monotonal voice of a computer screaming out those words, all while I heard the screams of the guards at the border. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Archer lift up some sort of giant weapon and head outside. I watched as the researchers also followed him outside. Kreese beckoned for me to follow, and so I did. I went outside, just in time to see the paint change colour from bleak red-yellow to pink. It was strange seeing it change colour. Was it the new atmosphere reacting with the paint? And then I saw the colour overwhelm one of the guards at the wall, running down the stairs to escape. He screamed as the colour overwhelmed him, falling, letting the colour spread to the ground. And then I realised it wasn't colour, but masses upon masses of pink worms devouring everything they could find. The wall slowly began to degrade, cracks forming, worms pouring in. I watched as the wall began to fall, crumbling into an ocean full of pink. And the ocean was heading straight for us.
"What are you waiting for?"
a loud, grumbly voice snarled. It was Archer shouting right at us.
"Run!"
And I ran, because my life depended on it. I looked back to see the tents being devoured by the primordial demons. I watched as fellow scientists fell, being reduced to nothing but pristine bone. Before that too was devoured, and nothing was left but empty air. And then I tripped. I fell, looking back to see the sea of worms, and I crawled, trying to get up and escape the worms at the same time until I realised they had stopped. Right where my foot was, the worms had stopped, in a straight line, from one end of the valley to the other, and now they were drilling into the earth, hiding away. I watched as a dying guard on the other side of the line of drilling worms started to choke, the atmosphere already changing. And yet, on my side, I breathed normally, completely all right. I watched as, inexplicably, a kind of membrane began to form right where the line was. I traced the membrane as it curved upwards, right until it was on top of the well. It was a biosphere. From a distance, it was almost impossible to see, and yet, right up close, it was perfectly obvious, albeit a little fuzzy and see-through. And then I heard a snarl, right in front of me. I snapped back to look right in front of me. The choking guard was snarling. He looked right at me, face bloody red, with half a skull exposed. He snarled as his mouth began to change, turning from a human smile into something bizarre. It turned into a sucker, like a tentacle, laced with small teeth and smaller tentacles. His eyes seemed to melt away, and his skin meshed together, becoming a mash of something faceless, save for the horrifying mouth. I yelped as the thing started to run, to devour me with that horrible mouth. I closed my eyes for the end, hoping for it to be quick when...
"It can't hurt you,"
Archer's voice flatly stated.
"They can't escape the infected site."
The atmosphere, I realised, wishing I'd realised that sooner. I sighed, relieved, yet still shaking, as I got up. I looked around. Most of the scientists with me, Dr. Kreese and the strange guy, Dr. Magnus, were all safe. The guards I'd seen at the quarantine wall were all gone, save for one or two. But still, that wasn't all. I looked back on the now infected part of the valley. The ground was fleshy, and the dead, at least the ones which hadn't been devoured to nothingness, were reanimating, transforming into the faceless, mouthy beings. Their heads seemed meshed to their shoulders. Their necks were nothing but a bulbous mass, making their shoulders look bigger, and heads look smaller. They growled, walking right at the border, but they wouldn't pass.
"They go back into the ground,"
Archer told me offhandedly. And just like the man said, the things got on all fours and seemed to be absorbed into the fleshy ground, screeching horribly as they did. "What about the houses?" I pointed out. "I was told they devour people or something, and then somehow expand and make houses."
"Just watch, scientist."
And so I did. I observed as the ground seemed to tear itself apart, forming the bones of the house, and then fill in the space between with a poor imitation of the house. The reanimated things appeared in the house, though their faces looked human for the most part. Their heads were still meshed with their shoulders, though. Besides that, they looked just like how they'd been before, even wearing the same clothes. and holding the same gear. It was amazing. In a strange, sick way, it just was. The houses were blooming almost like flowers. I watched as more primordial things emerged out of the fleshy ground. Things that weren't just the worms from earlier. Things that seemed almost older. To us, the place was an ecological dead zone, devoid of all but the tiniest bits of oxygen. But to the things inside, it was life at its finest.
So, Arch muttered, any idea how to kill this thing?
Yes, I smiled. I think I know a way, but first, I want to know what the heck is inside that well, and why this thing looks like a medieval village.
By the way, scientist, if the atmosphere or whatever is toxic to us humans, how did the people in the first incident survive? They were on the infected site.
I bet the biosphere keeping the atmosphere wasn't as strong as it is now, I explained. That's why the worms were underground. The man getting sucked in felt a biting sensation. Does that make sense? Archer nodded. A few moments later, I saw Kreese running towards me with two people who looked like emergency doctors. When they arrived, I informed them that I was okay and that I could deal with the cuts and bruises myself. Archer whispered something to Dr. Kreese, who smiled in a strange way, like how a parent proud of a child would smile. A moment later, we were all crowded inside one of the surviving tents on the outskirts of the valley. We huddled around a screen, with me in prime position to watch everything that was going on. The screen was live footage of a drone, entering the infected site, flying past the creatures on the ground. The animals there, primordial, ignored it, having no opinion on the drone. But then I was shocked to see animals that I recognised. There were some black bears down there, yet their faces had changed to the mouth the reanimated had. There was even an elk, except its face was round and tentacles were coming out of it, feasting on what looked like an ear-shaped mushroom on the ground. The animals were infected and reanimated the same way the humans were. This was a plague somehow, and the fact that it reanimated and changed the dead freaked me out. Eventually, the drone got to the well and began to descend. As the screen darkened, the drone's lights switched on, illuminating the well. The well impossibly seemed unaffected by the plague. The environment outside it was, yet the well was solid, save for tentacles that clung to the well, that reached all the way to the surface. It all seemed to be made of the same rock as the ground outside, but it was unaffected. This would be important, I noted, writing it down in a notebook. Writing started to appear on the stones that inexplicably burrowed deep into the earth. Writing of some ancient language I did not recognise, and judging by the murmurs of the academics around me, neither did they. And then the drone found itself in a cave, large and empty, save for what looked to be a church, upside down, pulsating up and down, all the while being held up in midair by tentacles with hooks that latched onto its edges. The hooked tentacles, the fossil from earlier. The church pulsed as a heart, and with each beat it sent shockwaves through the hooked tentacles and through the air, momentarily destabilizing the drone. It reached the appendages, running up the well too. "What's that?" I murmured. "An upside-down heart church," Dr. Kreese murmured back. We were all shocked, in awe. But no, I wasn't looking at the church. I was looking at something else, at the corner of the screen. "No," I replied, pointing at the corner. "Look at that." Quint, who was controlling the drone, turned it so we could get a better view of the thing I'd seen. It was a building, not like the fleshy imitations we'd seen bloom above ground. No, this one was man-made. Its posh white outer walls were visible, although stained by blood and partially covered by the occasional tentacle.
"Look,"
Archer excitedly uttered, pointing.
"A letter."
The drone began to shift, revealing two words in bright blue paint that had to have recently been painted. I read those 2 words, whispering them out loud. Shepherd technology.